over the proposed draft budget for buildings. So under housekeeping here, there were new questions that came in over the past few weeks. Those have been posted to the website with answers. So if you guys have not had a chance to check those out, I encourage you to today or later this weekend, just so you can see what our constituents are asking and the responses. And then I just wanted to quickly go over the updated timeline that I updated briefly or quickly. Let me bring this. Get too many things open. And I don't think we can we? Oh, amazing. Nicely done. All right, so we had the meeting September 20th. Today we are going to review the draft budget for the building types only, and then we'll see if folks are ready to vote to adopt a building plan, either the one-story or the two-story. At some point in October, we'll finalize the site selection, which is probably the biggest piece of the pie for us to move forward with making a final recommendation to the select board. We'll figure out the timing on that. I know that there's some outstanding questions with state departments and Eversource. So we'll figure out the timing of that once we've got some information. November, we'll spend some time, those of us that would have the capacity and would like to continue to help educate our constituents on our recommendation. There is the community gathering on December 13th, and I believe there's a desire for us to make a presentation at that community gathering. Perfect. So we'll spend some time in November prepping for that. And then we'll do the presentation at that December 13th community gathering. I think, in my mind, I am seeing us doing more of those community meetings and educating our constituents on our recommendation. I wouldn't just leave it to that December 13th one. So we'll figure that out and obviously see if the select board would even like us to do that. I'm saying that in hopes that they do. But we'll figure that out over the course of the next few weeks. Any questions on the timeline? All right. I didn't put this on the agenda, but Chief Cab, anything from you worth noting? Nothing. All right. Then let's jump into our content here. So we'll review the draft. We'll see if folks. I do believe there were some questions that when we left the last meeting, Tony asked if any questions come up, please submit them or please send them over. I do think a few went in, so we can talk through those, see if we're ready to vote to adopt the building plan, and then we'll open things up to the community members who are here for question and answer. All right, Tony, you want to walk us through the draft budget? And again, this is strictly for the building, not for the full package of land and building. And I think I put in my email the other day, the 3 items that are outstanding are wetlands from DES, poles with Eversource, and then the road cuttings, and figuring out if there's anything else that we would need to do with Department of Transportation. So I know that those are all in motion, and we'll have some answers, hopefully, in the next few weeks or so. Perfect. All
Great.
right, Tony.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, to the questions and answers, we've been trying to keep up on those. We've got responses that we worked through VHB, who is the site civil engineer, and LaValle as the architects, as you've been meeting with them. So we take those questions, vet it through a number of resources, compare it against what we know and other assumptions. So those answers are provided based on the best information we have at the time. And sometimes we don't have 100% answer vetted out, but it's something that we will continue to work on. During this phase of the process, communities that we engage with have a number of different ways that they manage through this early phase. In some communities, the project seed money, if you will, or start money, maybe somewhere between 100, maybe even up to $500,000 when you can really vet out and engineer the questions and the solutions, I should say, to the questions that we have. Other communities will approach capital projects just based off the rough budget and say, geez, we got to go in and ask for 15 million, but it will not exceed that. We tend to get pushback a little bit from those types of communities where the citizens say, we're voting for 15 million or whatever the number is. We don't have a plan. We don't know what we're getting. We don't know what it's going to look like. So there's always that push and pull. So for New London, the cover letter that you have, I start with that because we've all had questions. We on your project team, the designer and the project manager, we still have questions and we don't have all the answers. We don't have a site, right? So there's a big question. But we do know that projects of similar scope, size, and scale in communities with similar demographic, geographic areas, how they've dealt with these issues in the past. So I start with a cover letter that says, here's some of the assumptions that we're making. We've done that based on 2 sites that we've kind of narrowed down to over the past couple months. And those 2 sites, whatever happens moving forward, they lend themselves to very different projects. 198 Main Street, very sloping, multiple access, what we would typically maybe refer to as the postage stamp site, very small constricted site right in the middle of town. There's going to be some complexities with that, but it lends itself very well to that multi-story, 2-story building. Newport Road, 7 acres, not all of it usable, some wetlands. That lends itself very well to a single-story building, very spread out. To each of those, I've gone through and kind of demonstrated and highlighted just some of the bullet items. Newport Road, well and septic, not required. There's no endangered species habitats, and I'm not going to read through all these. You have them. But it lends itself to that single-story building. It includes construction out to 2026, as both of these do. We tend to estimate out to the midpoint of construction, hoping that we're buying stuff in advance. With that one, we had talked about minor and major impacts to wetland. The estimates that you're seeing today included wetland replication at a 1-to-1 ratio, which is pretty common. There are some commissions throughout New England that will settle in on 1 to 1.5 ratio. We actually had some emails this week that, it's pretty interesting that the state DES would rather just have you maybe put money into a fund rather than replicate. So there's some different ways of dealing with it. Single-story building, Newport Road, what you're going to see in the estimate is a very spread out single-story building. So with that, you have a large expanse of concrete slab on grade, which requires, digging a big hole, making a lot more earthwork, a lot more concrete. Your building envelope is the same. Your square footage is going to be very similar, but your roof covers the entire building, right? The comparative analysis for Main Street, 198 Main Street, we're not bringing 300 feet of utility lines from Newport Road deep into a wooded site where we now have to cut roadways and access driveways. Your stubs are right there off Main Street. We're grabbing utilities in a very close proximity to the building. The building is multi-story, so you build a smaller concrete footprint, you put a smaller roof on it, and you vertically stack your square footage. The downside, as you'll see in that, when it comes to the cost, you go from 14,862 square feet to almost 16,000, 15,800. That's the addition of the stairwells, the addition of an elevator, how things shape out. You have more common hallway, you have more what we call common space in hallways, stairs. And so that grows the square footage, but it condenses the building footprint to fit on that site. And we'll go through some of those numbers. You have a building, if you were to buy that site, that needs to be raised. Foundations need to be removed from the ground. So there's some inherent cost differences there. But again, your utilities and your site work are very compact, constricted, easily accessible, and your drive lanes and your access in and out of that site, there's multiple routes already established, so that's really, really helpful. So those are some of the assumptions that are made. In the numbers that we've presented, we have not included any of the site acquisition costs, just to keep things balanced, because that was going to, A, we weren't confident in those numbers, and B, to just plug numbers in was really going to throw off potentially the total project cost in looking at the building. If we were doing site selection, back to our original site selection matrix, we would plug those costs in there to evaluate, is the benefit of being close in town or out of town, how does that rate and weigh the weighting of a matrix in a site selection? So just to wrap up that cover letter, general projects, either one, assumptions that we've made, you see up there, construction starting in mid-2025. We're here if this project were to move forward consistently and not delay for 2, 3, 4 months. We'd expect that our construction drawings would be done mid-2025, and mid-construction would be early to mid-2026, wrapping up fall 2026. Permitting, most of our municipal projects, the local permitting is waived, but we have state fire marshal, state permitting we include. This project does have a tower at 100 feet. I'm not sure if 125, 120, 6 antennas, 8 antennas are appropriate. We haven't done that level of investigation yet, but I do have very recent numbers on a 100-foot tower with 6 antenna, so it was very easy for me to grab that number that's only a few months old and bringing it over and share it with this. Things like short-term borrowing bans, how the town is going to fund this, we haven't gotten to that point in the conversation yet, so those numbers aren't in here. And what we do know is all of our clients today want to be, net ready, net zero ready, solar ready. There's a lot of infrastructure money out there for vehicle charging stations. So we do provide in our cost estimates at least the provisions for adding solar, just like La Valley has kind of demonstrated in their plans where solar might fit or how big the array is. We would carry space in the building for that. We would carry the conduit, the infrastructure to support those solar panels if they were provided later. There'll be a couple of spots out in the parking areas, probably one in the public area, 1 or 2 in the patrol area if we were to go that route. We want to bring the junction box out, the conduits out, provide for the vehicle charging stations, and then through the development of the project, we would work on any grants that are available to pay for the equipment and that sort of process. So those are some of the assumptions. I don't
Tony,
know if you want
can I just
talk about that first.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
Yep.
as we think about the electric vehicle charging stations, I do know that the Energy Committee has been researching grants for those things. So I do think that there is money out there, and it might be a nice synergy to connect with them if and when we get to that point, and see if there's anything that they're working on that we might be able to combine in. So just put a pin in that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, everybody's doing it, so we have to plan for it. And where and when it gets funded, it's nice if you don't have to go back and dig up the parking lot and all your conduits and junctions are in place. I would like to start with the building trade ones. And so, yeah, we'll start here with 0 Newport Road. Divisions are divisions of construction. I'm not going to go too deep into that. It's a typical format for construction. It goes through existing conditions, concrete, masonry, all the different, what we would call subcontractor trades within a typical project. And we're using a combination of information. I know Lincoln was one of the local recent projects that LaValle has worked on. So I've worked with them over the past couple weeks to take those local numbers, assess with them what else we're seeing in the industry, what costs are being developed, what they like to use for finishes. Do they like sheet linoleum on the floor? How much ceramic tile in the bathrooms? We build cells and cell detaining areas in a number of ways. Are we going to use concrete? Is it hollow? Is it filled? There's a lot of detail, believe it or not, in this very short summary. But for Newport Road, you'll see a lot of these numbers, if you can see up there to the cost per square foot. We take a trade such as the building siding, and then that siding has a per square foot cost as it relates to the square footage of the building. So even though it has a different square foot cost, if you were to measure the wall, right, the height, length, square footage of wall, how does that correlate to the square footage of the building at 14,800 square feet? So we want to be able to do that based on the square footage so that when the committee comes back or the group comes back and says, hey, how do we take 14,008 down closer to the 14,002 that the program related to, and how is it different, that we can make those assumptions and those adjustments based off the square footage. So when you see the cost per square foot number, it is the cost per square foot of the building, not of the particular material or trade, if you will. So that's why we can take those numbers from Newport Road to Main Street or to any other project and keep it very consistent. Adam, if you'd scroll down. So the things that are unique to Newport Road and the things that are unique to Main Street, we've highlighted. And so here you can see all the other typical costs are very similar. They're very industry standard. Now, what does Newport Road do for this project? Well, this project is going to have a much heavier site cost. So earthwork, exterior improvements, roads, curbs, wetlands, all of those things are highlighted in these 3 categories down here. And then we drop that down to say, okay, our total cost, our building cost, what is our site cost? There's $1.6 million in site cost, we believe, just to support the development of the site to receive this 14,000 square foot building, or 14.8. That's going to drive up that cost on a per square foot basis, and it's going to drive up the cost of the overall building project, the total project cost, if we were to go to Newport Road. Now, if you'll scroll down again to the next one. Great.
Can we just pause for a second? Are there any questions from the committee on 0 Newport Road? Nothing. Great. Okay.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to these when we have them side by side. So again, in this one, whether it's concrete at Main Street, concrete foundation, slab on grade at the lower level, metals, masonry, any type of siding, those numbers, if you print these 2 sheets out and you're able to compare them side by side, you'll see a lot of the unit cost trade numbers are, again, very similar. The items that are not are highlighted. And I'm now just seeing I highlighted one on the cost side and one in the trade side, but bear with me on that. So existing conditions, we talked a little bit about it. You buy 198 Main Street, you've got a building to deal with. We've got some demolition costs separate from Newport Road, different from Newport Road. Metal fabrications, we need 2 sets of stairs now that we're going up and down within the building, and we're vertically communicating between floors. Roofing and flashing, that one, when you look at it, will be less money, right? Because now we've taken what would be 17,000, I think, was the square foot of the actual roofing on a 14,000 square foot building. And we've condensed that down to a 7,000 square foot footprint that probably equates to about 9,000 square foot of roof, covering 15,000 square feet of usable space. So we all can understand how that works. So these are the highlighted items that you would see either increases from or reductions from the assessment of Newport. Scrolling down, added an elevator, 2-stop elevator, and then the earthwork is significantly less. Here you see, again, as I described, the postage stamp. We're not dragging in utilities. We're not building these 2 entrance roads across wetlands, and we've had some discussions of, can we bridge over the wetland? How do we replicate the wetland? You know, significant costs there. This, you're saving $700,000 or thereabouts in site work without having to deal with the Newport Road site. So there's certainly some offsets. Your 2 buildings on a cost per square foot, one's 14.8, one's 15.8, are very similar in cost when you compare those 2. That's when you can go to this one.
On the front.
Yep. So the summary of these, we wanted to put this together to now side by side these. You've seen the breakdown of what goes into all the costs. You've heard about the assumptions that we've worked through with LaValle and VHB and a few other things. What this document does is align those construction costs at the top of the page, and then total project cost trickles down through the remainder of the page. And so when people say, geez, you know, so-and-so spent X amount on a building, well, there's other costs that go into a total project cost. What this does is it takes the 14,862, the 585, the trade pages, brings them over so you see, you know, a building at $417 a square foot, $414 a square foot or thereabouts. And now it takes and says, okay, now we're looking at a building, it's X amount of dollars per square foot, escalated, because we talked about the escalation cost. Many of us this week have heard about, you know, the union strike. Building supplies, as I heard from a couple of resources, we were 3 months away from having significant building supply shortages if the labor strike stayed as it was. So hopefully we've avoided that at least for a few months. But this document takes that square foot from the trade, brings it over, adds the escalation cost to it, kind of rolls it back in and says, okay, now today your escalated cost is $788, all in total construction with the site cost added in. If we delay for another 2 years, it's anybody's guess. You know, we talked a lot this week about, you know, what happens in November with the election. Do things go up? Do things go down? Estimators in general that I've spoken to and that we're currently working with are carrying 5% as a safe margin over the next couple years. So about halfway down the page, you'll see escalation carried at 5% through 2026, or the midpoint of construction. That calculates that number, rolls it back up so that in the top box, you see the total construction with site, gross square footage, escalated. So now we've got the whole thing escalated out. And then beyond that, we look at what we typically refer to as soft costs. So construction, things that are hard costs built by the trades, if you would, they would be the numbers provided in a bid when you open the envelope. It's everything else that trickles down after that. Furniture, fixtures, program equipment, dispatch consoles, all of those items, kind of a analogy that we use. If you were to take the building, lift the roof off, tip it upside down and shake it, what falls out, right? What's not built in? All the stuff that falls out goes into this total furniture, fixtures, and equipment category. So we've brought the tower in under data and telecom. We've got cabling and jacks. Some of the items will be categorized in construction, and so we note that. And this number that you see is off to the right-hand side. The recent local similar project is one that we've discussed here. We just didn't want to put the name up on the screen, but it's one that we've discussed and you're familiar with. Their project was about 5.3 million. If they were opening that bid envelope in 2025 and building it through 2026, their project cost escalated would be 6.3 million. So when we start to compare, well, geez, why did such and such a town, they just built theirs for 5.5. Well, we didn't just build ours. We're building ours in the future. There's cost inherent to that. And what I've learned from working with LaValle is that's just the construction number. There were things in there that were not part of their construction that have been added along the way. We didn't feel that it was a good comparison. I didn't feel that it was a good comparison to bring those numbers in here. So we've just listed those as unknown. But we did feel that the building cost per square foot, the design elements, the things that are factored into their building and built in their building would be very similar and relevant to your project. Beyond furniture, fixtures, and equipment.
Tony, sorry,
Yes.
we do have one.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Great. I love a break.
Tony, realizing no two buildings are the same, no two sites are the same, no two towns are the same, but if, as you just said, if you boil this back down to simply the 2x4s in the building construction, this cost per square foot of the proposed two buildings, which are awash, they're about the same, is about 30% more than the cost per square foot of this other recent similar building. Where's the increase? Because the only thing you're showing as unknowns are things like fees and furniture. The actual building costs appear to all be shown here for this similar building. No, I'm looking at the cost per square foot escalated. New construction dollars per square foot escalated. 449, 445 for us, 339 for them is about a 30% increase.
That's what was given to us as a cost of construction for this particular project. In this case, I had the folks that we work with in our office that do the spreadsheet just run that number backwards. So if that's the number that they opened at 5.3, then at the time they were developing their project, their estimator was probably looking at a building of $339 or 456 escalated. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand how you get a per square foot cost. My question is, where's the difference between their police station up 93 and our police station up 89? I mean, this isn't a minor, shift. This is a major shift in something, and this is not including the site.
So, Tony, did I understand you correctly that it would be essentially 3 fiscal years of escalation caused different last year, this year, and next year comparatively? So there'd be 3 years of 5% compounding, right?
In
So,
the local similar project.
Right.
Yes,
So
there's
if
more
we adjust,
escalation in
if we adjust that alone, that brings it up to 392 per square foot on theirs, which obviously is not exactly the same, but fills some of the gap.
I think there were also some costs that were not factored into this original building, and that's why those are unknown, and ours are actually plugged in. Because,
the numbers ahead of those. I get.
yep.
You're
Oh,
just
okay.
only looking at the construction
Yeah.
piece.
Is,
We don't know what they...
I don't know what their costs were, Phil. The spreadsheet's kind of calculating it backwards, is all I can say.
Somebody gave somebody a number here, so.
Right,
If what Adam is saying is true, then your escalation column is incorrect, because presumably this is all escalated to the same point
right,
in time, right?
right. If they were building that today, their building would be 6.3, escalated to 2026.
10% higher than that. You've only put in 1 year of escalation, not 3 years.
2.
Well, based on what Adam said,
The 5.3 was given to us 2 weeks ago as a comparative similar project. If
that's what it would cost now.
correct,
Okay, so,
Okay.
all right, so then,
So it's not an error in the escalation.
not an error in
No.
escalation.
So
Each-
where's the
each-
30% increase come from?
each is calculating to the midpoint at 5% till 2026.
Phil's correct in that 30% is a pretty significant difference. I mean,
It may very well calculate that way,
But it
but that's
doesn't.
why I've gone through the trades based on your buildings. I don't know what this building had or didn't have in it, in their construction number. Did they have anticipation for solar, anticipation for vehicle charging stations? You know, that's why I thought it prudent to go through the assumptions first, as opposed to just what's in a number. I don't know what's in their number. I did spend a bit of time with LaValle talking about the types and levels of finishes. Are they millwork heavy? Is it linoleum? Is it sealed concrete? Did they put epoxy floors everywhere in the detention areas, which are nice to have, but a lot of people can't and don't afford that. I don't know what drives that 30% difference.
is there, I was just going to say, is there any way for you to chase that down for us and maybe come back, or is it truly an unknown?
If the project were to continue, you would see a refinement in that as the architects more develop their project. We can keep them consistent, and we'll have a lot of conversations about what is the fit and finish of their other stations as we're planning, right? And there's always those add alternates. The epoxy floor would be nice to have. It's very easy to clean in a detention area. But sealed concrete, although you have to seal it more often than an epoxy floor, you don't get the durability of it, but you get 50 cents a square foot on an install versus $6 a square foot on an install. Those are detailed differences that, again, will swing a project budget an awful lot.
I think you put your finger on it, and that's the time shift between these two analyses. Their project is after somebody sat down and said, we really need gold-plated doorknobs. Your project is before that discussion happens. So, fair enough.
Great. And then, so just scrolling down, furniture fixtures, we talked about that. Architectural costs, these are inherent soft costs that every project deals with. If you call around to 5 different communities with recent projects, how much was their total project? They may or may not ever be able to tell you. Depends on who they had tracking all the costs. You know, chiefs generally like to say, hey, my building costs $6 million. Oh, that might be the number they got out of a contractor envelope. It may not reflect the total project budget. If we pay for legal fees, bond costs, some of these other items, if you're scrolling down at them under owner's costs, there are a number of different ways where communities will say, you know what, we'll pay for that out of our general bonding fund. We're not going to charge the project for owner legal fees. So if council reviews contracts, if there's construction disputes, they get handled under a town's general legal fund and oftentimes don't actually hit a project cost. We like to highlight all these items because we've experienced the multitude of ways that they are typically handled, and we want to be able to have the conversation with you, the community, while the plans are being developed. Will you waive building local permits? Will you pay for bond and short-term costs out of some other fund? Or do we have to plan for those costs within this budget? So it's kind of the a la carte shopping list, if you will. Local, we've made some assumptions that we're going to waive it. The building permits, we've buried that cost in construction right now for some other permitting, the state fire marshal and those types of permits. Printing and bid cost, construction utilities, that's one where the contractor will bring in a temporary service through power supply. They will pay for that. In some cases, if we were downtown Main Street, that building has electrical on site right now, you may opt to say, hey, you know what? We as a government agency get a cheaper rate than the contractor is going to get. We'll pay the energy usage for the drills and the tools and all of that. So there are different ways that communities address each of those items. Everything down through move location, relocation, and you see that I've highlighted site acquisition as those costs are not in here. And then we carry 5% contingency for both owner project contingency, that's on the bulk of the work. Construction is solely for construction. Yes.
Jeff had a
So,
question.
yeah, what is program-related equipment?
So program-related equipment is loose equipment that is typical copiers, new servers, desktop equipment, could be monitors, but we have the AV line in there as well. We just haven't gone through that type of process in this. Equipment in this line item is mostly related to the dispatch equipment, communications and tower. The communication data cabling and telecom equipment is your phone switch, your server coming into the building. Now, where was I recently? And they said, we don't even need that. All technology is fiber. All the servers reside in town hall. The building doesn't even need a server. It will just have a fiber connection back to town hall. You know, so those level of details we just haven't got into.
Tony, on the contingency,
Yep.
10% sounds awful low at this stage of the game, doesn't it?
It's not for us, no.
At a conceptual level?
Yep.
Okay.
By the time we go to bid, I'd like to have that down to 3 and 2 instead of 5 and 5. So there is some development built in here. Typically, you know, and I think we talked a little bit about this, when you're hiring an architect, architects have what's called a standard of care that they operate within under their contract. So that nobody's perfect, right? No set of drawings is without a mistake or an error. Architects' standard of care for this type of project in this locale, and it's as customarily and ordinarily provided for by an architect for a similar project, is probably 1.5%. And so what they say, legally, I might have up to 1.5% of mistakes in my drawings before you go after my errors and omissions insurance. And you should expect and plan to pay for that 1.5% without coming after my insurance. And so what we will do by the time we get to bidding, that construction, which is solely based on the architect's drawings, right? We're putting this out to bid based on their documents. We want that percentage to be down to 2% so that you're covering that cost or anything associated with it.
I'm completely with you. I think on the construction side, things are well understood. It's new construction. Maybe there's risk on the site work and that kind of stuff. I'm more worried about the owner changes.
The owner, carrying on that description, we recommend that you should not exceed 3%. If we've all been involved in the process and the development of the project and the development of the drawings, and we're out there making changes on the fly beyond 3%, there's something gone wrong. Now, it might be there has been a major change in methodology, or we're adding, 4 more communities to the dispatch, and we need 3 more stations. I don't know what that might be, but we generally use 3% at the time of bid. And owners are pretty good about, if we go over 3%, we got to go back to the community for more money. That's generally not something any of you will want to do. So at the time, Phil, look, this is a work in progress, right? If we all get down the road and 6 months from now, there's something that you're thinking is going to change or not change, or, we bump it up as a contingency, and it's something that you don't have to spend, but it's a safety net. Great.
Okay. Let me go back to the agenda. The questions that came in over the past week, I know one of them was mine, which was when we were looking at the one-story building, there were 2 bathrooms back to back, one within the community room and then one out in the public hallway. And I didn't know if there was truly a need for 2 separate bathrooms or if that could go down to 1. I just don't have any concept of whether those 2 bathrooms back to back are really.
It could. It really could. The 2 bathrooms are based on how often is the community room, training room in use.
Yeah.
So providing one in there, if you were having a regional police session in there with law enforcement or, restricted personnel,
Yep.
and somebody else came into the lobby, you're leaving one in the secure area and one outside.
Got it.
Secured invitees could certainly go outside and use the toilet room. The other part of that conversation is, how often will you have 30 people in training or in meeting there? If that meeting breaks, 30 people lined up at one bathroom could be an issue.
Sure.
Now, if it's police and it's training and it's restricted personnel, the police department always has the ability to say, hey, come deeper into the building and use another toilet room
Yep.
in the secure area. But the basic reason is to have one in the secure area for those folks using the meeting room and one for the general public coming in.
Gotcha.
How often that happens, you'd all need to decide.
I don't know if we've talked about this, Lieutenant Keith or Chief Cobb. Would that community or would that training room be solely used for the purpose of our police or our police force and any potential training she might have with other, I don't know, any other municipalities, I don't know, but, or would that be also open to committees or the public to use as well?
You want to take this, Lieutenant, or you want me to? I would absolutely be happy to open that up to other community members and committees and things that wanted to use it, because there is the ability for it to be secure. You can't get beyond the multi-purpose room into the more secure
Right.
part of the police department.
Yep.
So,
Okay. I actually do think that sort of changes my mindset, at least, because it does feel like we are sometimes low on space for committees or for other folks to meet. And so that does sort of change my mindset on the 2 bathrooms, because I do, if it was just for training, I think I would have a hard time seeing that being used so frequently to warrant 2 bathrooms, but if it could be open to the public, I actually do think it might be used more frequently.
Yeah, if I can.
Yeah.
Location has a lot to do with that as well. So when you talk about the general public, if you're on Main Street,
Yeah.
you might be more apt to get somebody walking in, hey, I need directions, can I use the bathroom while
Yep.
I'm here? You know, I've got a question,
Sure.
whatever. Up Newport Road, 300 feet in, you're not going to get the walk-in foot traffic.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Right, that's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? I know that I had vote and then open to community Q&A, but I think a few meetings ago, Colin suggested that we flip those, and I do think there's validity in that. So I would open it up for us to be able to hear anything from our constituents who are here before potentially moving to a vote. Are there any questions or comments?
I'm just confused. So your vote is between a 1-story and a 2-story, but at this point, those 2 things are tied to a site, which we've already leaned in one direction on. So I'm just not clear where this 1- and 2-story thing comes into it, other than the fact, are we picking this or that? Is this the final recommendation?
No.
Well, what else would be on the table?
Location. We would have to.
We've already talked about that.
But we still have those missing components that we're waiting on.
That just equates to price, and there's been no
Sure,
limit
and I
on a
think
budget
that-
on this job, so.
Sure, but I do think that once we get those final components of the 3 outstanding items on 0 Newport Road, those might be $20 million extra, and we say we actually can't make a full recommendation to the select board based on that.
Yeah, I'm just confused as to why we're worrying about 1-story or 2-story, because those just reflect a site at this point.
If folks would prefer we not vote on a 1 or 2-story and save it for one vote for the whole package, we can certainly do that. It's really up to us. How are folks feeling? Hold the vote?
Yeah, wait.
Wait? Okay. All right, so I think we'll wait until we hear more on those 3 outstanding items for 0 Newport Road. We get a full picture, and then we can come back and review those and go from there. Does that feel right? Yeah.
is there any other work that I can do with Colliers or LBA to address any other questions about the 1 or 2-story options in the meantime? Because I guess I would want the committee's time to be spent really focusing on site at that point, unless all of your questions or concerns are answered about the 1 or 2-story. You have the opportunity to focus on site, because the site lends itself, at least these 2 that we have in consideration, lends itself to which option you'll be going toward. So just a thought of if there's anything else we can continue to clarify in the meantime.
I have a number of questions, but I don't think they're they're germane at this point. I mean, whether there's one bathroom or two in the scope of an $11 million budget isn't going to push things one way or the other. I am confused about the preparation for solar, Tony. You indicated that you kind of included that, but your narrative says they were excluded. And I didn't know whether you're talking about, running a piece of conduit to a parking lot, which is chump change, or, providing a stronger roof or something like that matters to the budget. And there's other minor questions in here, but again, that's not really what we need to spend our time on, I think, at this point.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I think we will adjourn for today. We will continue to work on getting answers on those 3 remaining items. I think technically the next meeting would,
You're not going to open it to the public?
well, we did, and they didn't have anything. Yeah, the 18th, which I am not here for. Neither is Tony. So, oh boy, all right. So here's what we'll do. I will send an email out to, and I know that we've got some dates for the select board that they are also not available. So why don't I do some coordination between the committee, Colliers, and our select board to figure out when the next meeting might be. I feel pretty good, Adam and Chief, who have been working with these external folks, that we can probably get some prices or estimates in the next few weeks to have another meeting.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I've already made those inroads.
Okay.
We have for all 3 of them. So
Perfect.
it's a matter of trying to coordinate, I think, a
Okay.
little bit more.
So I'll take that on. I'll send folks an email, and we'll figure out when we might be able to meet in a few weeks, and we'll go from there. All right. Thank you. Happy Friday.